She was left for dead in the heart of an alien war zone. Wounded, alone, and hunted by a hive that never loses track of its prey. But instead of giving up, she crawled through the toxic mist, stole the enemy's mind, and brought back the one thing that could turn the tide of war. This isn't just survival, and when it's the beginning of their end. Stay with us, because you've never heard a story like this. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The wind on Theris 9 didn't howl like on Earth. It buzzed. Thin and metallic, the wind carried particles of toxic dust that clung to every surface. For Maren Hollis, it filled the cracks in her armor and scratched against her helmet like 1,000 dry whispers. Somewhere in the distance, thunder shook the ground. Not weather, but weapons. Maren was lying half buried in the edge of a crater, half conscious, her ribs aching and her vision fogged. She couldn't remember the last few minutes clearly. One moment she was rerouting power to the defense turrets. The next she was on her back, smoke rising from the cracked plates of her armor. The Carvaxi, insect-like aliens with shimmering black exoskeletons and no mercy, had broken through the western perimeter. Her division had fallen back. They'd left her. The war had been dragging on for 3 standard years, long enough for hope to wear thin and mistakes to pile up. Maren didn't blame them. In the chaos, she probably looked dead. If she didn't move soon, the assumption would become reality. She reached for her utility belt, hissing in pain. Her side was burned. The armor melted inwards from a direct hit. Her leg was worse. She wasn't sure if it was broken or just numbed from shock. She tore a strip from her undersuit and pressed it to the wound, her fingers shaking. Her helmet's HUD flickered, warning of oxygen leak and rising toxicity. Above her, the sky was a dull brown. Twin suns struggled to shine through the haze. The Carvaxi were out there hunting. She could hear the echo of their footsteps, clicks and scratches on stone, always in rhythm. They moved in formation like a single creature with many legs. Maren knew the hive mind controlled them. Orders passed from the officers straight to the drones, no delay, no confusion. That coordination was their greatest strength, and maybe their weakness. She pulled herself up slightly, enough to see over the ridge. She couldn't go back to her unit, not like this. But if she stayed still, she would be found. And the Carvaxi didn't take prisoners. Not alive, anyway. From a pouch on her chest, she drew a small device, round, metal, and still covered in dust. It looked like a child's toy, but it was something she had built in secret over long nights during quiet shifts. A signal disruptor, designed to scramble Carvaxi chemical links. It had never been tested. She hadn't even gotten approval to build it. But now it was the only thing she had. Her hands worked quickly, wiping off the dust, checking the energy cell, rerouting a wire with her last bit of tape. "You better work," she muttered, voice cracked. Then, with a deep breath, she armed it and tossed it. It landed 20 meters away and began to emit a faint pulse, invisible and silent. But the effect was immediate. A squad of Carvaxi froze, their antennae twitching wildly. They started moving in jerky, broken lines, confused. One walked in a circle, another fired at nothing. Maren stared, wide-eyed. It was working. A fresh wave of footsteps echoed. More Carvaxi, including a taller figure wearing heavier armor. An officer. This one moved differently, more deliberately, its ornate helmet glinting. Maren knew what that helmet was. It wasn't just for protection or show. It was a command relay. The hive coordination passed through it. Without it, the unit would be blind. She stared at it, and an impossible thought entered her mind. Take it. No sane person would think of that. She was injured, alone, barely armed, but something inside her clicked into place. The part of her that had built EMP traps from scrap, that had patched up shield grids with chewing gum and solder. She could either die here quietly, or do something impossible and maybe change the course of this battle. She began to crawl. Slowly, every motion lit up her nerves with pain, but she ignored it. The crater's slope offered cover. The dust clung to her armor, dulling the sheen, making her just another rock in the wasteland. Her disruptor still worked, confusing the first squad, buying her minutes at most. As she moved, she passed a fallen Carvaxi drone. Its weapon was twisted, but its comms unit was intact. Marin pried it off and slipped it into her pouch. Every scrap might be useful. Her goal was clear now, not just survival. If she could get that helmet, if she could bring it back, the thought gave her fuel. She stopped near another crater, panting hard. The officer was less than 50 meters away, scanning the area. Marin waited, watching, memorizing its rhythm. The others followed it blindly. She had no plan beyond reaching. Her mind raced. She needed to be unpredictable. The Carvaxi couldn't process irregular patterns. That's why humans were dangerous to them. A piece of metal nearby caught her eye, a discarded targeting beacon. She smiled through the pain. Maybe she could fake a signal, draw them away. One move at a time. Above her, the wind shifted, and dust blew across the rocks in waves. The Carvaxi officer raised its head. The helmet caught the sunlight and flared. Marin looked at it and didn't see an enemy. She saw a key, a symbol, a chance. She pulled herself forward again, teeth clenched, heart pounding. No one knew she was alive. The enemy was closing in. And all she had was a broken body, a homemade gadget, and an idea that bordered on madness. But that was enough, because Marin Hollis wasn't ready to die. Not today. The air was thicker now. Toxic mist clung to every surface like damp smoke, making it harder for Marin Hollis to breathe, even through her damaged helmet. Her side ached with each movement, and her leg dragged slightly behind her. Still she moved, slowly, carefully, and with the focus of someone whose only option was forward. The Carvaxi officer was close, closer than she wanted to admit. Every few minutes she spotted its tall shape cutting through the haze, leading its confused swarm as they tried to regroup after the disruptor pulse. The officer's helmet gleamed faintly, even in the gloom, the strange alien symbols glowing, like fireflies. That helmet wasn't just headgear. It was a brain, a map, a control tower. Take it out and the whole Carvaxi formation might crumble. Marin stayed low, using the terrain to hide her progress. Every rock was a blessing. Every crack in the ground was a shield. She clutched her last 2 pulse mines close to her chest. They were old designs, barely enough to stall a single drone, but maybe, just maybe, they could shake up the hive long enough for her to reach her target. In orbit above Theris 9, Corwin Jex sat in the signal control room of the human flagship, half bored and snacking on synthetic fruit strips. He'd been scanning the surface for any sign of survivors from the Western Front when something strange appeared on his console. A burst of non-Carvaxi frequency, masked just enough to avoid full detection. Curious, he leaned in. "That's not bug talk," he muttered. He ran a deeper scan, but the signal had already faded. Still, it left behind a pattern, human tech, without a doubt. Someone's alive down there. Marin didn't know if anyone could hear her. Her communications were still down, and even if she could scream into the void usually didn't scream back, so she kept moving, pushing through the ache and the cold. Her fingers were stiff from blood loss, but she managed to pull a cracked handheld unit from her belt. It wasn't good for talking, but it could still generate localized signal loops. Enough to fake a small unit's presence. With a few quick taps, she activated a decoy pattern. Instantly, the machine began broadcasting the biometric readings of 3 human soldiers across several nearby locations, a trick she'd used during simulations back at training. The Carvaxi picked it up fast. She could see their formation shift, some drones pulling away from the officer and scattering in different directions. Good, she thought. Now they're guessing. Her hands trembling, she crawled into a broken gully. The officer was just ahead now, alone except for a few nearby guards. Marin watched its movements closely. It communicated with small, sharp gestures, sending bursts of information through its helmet. Its precision was impressive. Nothing wasted, nothing extra. The others moved when it moved, paused when it paused. Take away that direction, and they were nothing more than lost insects in a storm. She reached into her pocket and felt the last of her EMP pebbles. Just 3. She placed them one by one in the soil, forming a triangle around the command group. The pulses wouldn't stop the officer, but they might blind his scouts. She crouched behind a jagged outcrop, breath shallow. With a deep exhale, she triggered the sequence. The first pulse lit the area with a dull hum. One Carvaxi drone froze, then began twitching violently. The second pulse followed, knocking another soldier's gear offline. Alarms buzzed. Confusion spread. The third pulse hit just as the officer raised its head, antennae waving sharply. The officer reacted fast, almost too fast. It barked a signal and its guards began scanning the perimeter. But the damage was done. The outer lines of the formation were breaking apart, unsure of their orders, some even colliding as they tried to regroup. A few fired blindly into the mist, thinking they saw movement where there was none. Marin slid closer, nearly face first in the dust. Her suit was almost out of power, and her vision blurred now and then. She bit down hard, willing herself to stay alert. She could hear her own heartbeat louder than anything else. Then just meters away, she froze. The officer was standing near what looked like a Carvaxi data station, some kind of portable command relay growing straight out of the rock. The alien leaned over it, adjusting frequencies. It was distracted. This was the moment. Marin reached into her jacket, where she had hidden her last weapon, a compact blade coated with a light electric charge. Enough to stun, not kill. She wasn't interested in the officer. She wanted the helmet. With a slow, steady breath, she rose to her knees, locked her eyes on the target, and launched herself forward. The officer heard her at the last second, turning fast, but not fast enough. She slammed into it with all the strength she had left, driving the blade under one of its armored joints. Sparks flew. The officer screeched and twisted, throwing her off with ease. But she didn't need to win the fight. She only needed to reach the latches on the side of the helmet. She did. There was a pop of pressure, a hiss of air. The seals released. The helmet shifted. With one final tug, Marin yanked it free. The Carvaxi roared, its exposed antennae flickering wildly. The guards shouted in response, but the hive link was broken. Orders didn't come. Marin threw herself backward, helmet in hand, and activated the small flash unit strapped to her chest. Light exploded across the battlefield. In the chaos, she vanished into the mist. The world had become a blur of movement and pain. Marin Hollis ran, if it could be called running, with one hand clutching the alien command helmet to her chest, and the other pushing herself forward through the thick fog. Her injured leg dragged behind her, barely responding. Her side throbbed, with every step blood soaking the bandages she had wrapped earlier. The only thing keeping her moving was purpose. She had the helmet. She had taken it. Now she just had to get it back to her people. Behind her, the Carvaxi camp had erupted into chaos. The flash had overloaded their vision sensors, disorienting them long enough for her to escape, but she knew that wouldn't last. The officer she had attacked might be down but not dead, and the others would regroup fast. The hive wasn't used to surprise. It wasn't used to failure. And now, it was angry. The landscape offered no kindness. Theris 9 was all broken rock, acidic fog, and sharp metallic dust that stung the skin and cut through gear like sandpaper. Marin stayed low, following dips in the ground, staying clear of open spaces. The helmet was heavy and awkward, and she had to tie it to her belt with pieces of her own shredded jacket. It pulsed faintly, glowing with an eerie blue light like it was alive. She didn't know exactly what it held, data, signals, whatever held the hive together, but it was powerful. That much she could feel. Back at the human base, the command center was silent as Corwin Jex stared at his screen. He'd tracked the strange movement across the Carvaxi lines for nearly 20 minutes now. Something was different. Their formations were off. Their signals didn't match their usual patterns. Then he saw it. One signature moving fast, weaving through the chaos. Human. Injured. Alive. "Get me the commander," he said, rising from his chair. "Now." Marin reached the outer edge of the ridge line, just short of the zone marked as no man's land. She paused, panting, her muscles trembling with exhaustion. She needed to rest, but she didn't have time. Every second gave the Carvaxi a chance to catch up. Every second meant a risk of detection by the automated turrets that lined the battlefield. Turrets that didn't care what uniform she wore. Her identification signal was gone fried in the first attack. That meant the human defenses wouldn't recognize her. If she got too close, they would open fire without warning. She had to find another way through. She scanned the area. A broken sensor relay sat half buried in the dirt, its antenna still, blinking faintly. She crawled to it and started digging. Inside, the unit was half functional, its wires frayed, its power cell flickering. But to Marin, it was a gift. She pulled a patch cable from her gear and connected her helmet's internal system to the relay. Maybe, just maybe, she could override the friend or foe filter long enough to walk through without being shot. The system fought her. Error messages flashed across her visor. She ignored them, working line by line. Her hands were numb and her vision doubled. The poison in the mist was getting to her. She could feel it in her chest and her head, making her dizzy. Still, she worked. And finally, the signal blinked green. She stood up, slowly, and began walking toward the defense perimeter. Each step was a gamble. She held her breath as the first turret turned her way, lights glowing, target lock blinking. But it didn't fire. It paused, then turned away. She laughed, short and sharp, half relief, half disbelief. But she wasn't. Safe yet? A low hum rose behind her, the sound of Carvaxi flight units. They had found her trail. She picked up her pace, limping faster, the helmet bouncing against her side. She could see the human line now, blurry through the haze. Movement, shapes, her people. She waved one hand in the air, using her last emergency, flare in the other. A bright blue light arced across the sky. Gunfire burst around her. Someone had opened fire, mistaking her for a threat. Bullets tore into the ground near her feet. She dropped behind a rock, panting, unable to scream over the noise. Then a voice cut through the chaos. "Hold your fire, that's one of ours." Scout Loma, barely out of her first month on the front, had recognized the blue flare pattern from her training manuals. She sprinted forward with a squad behind her, weapons ready, eyes scanning the mist. When they found Marin, she was barely conscious, curled around the alien helmet like it was more important than her own life. Loma knelt beside her, eyes wide. Are you carrying what I think you're carrying?" Marin opened one eye and gave a crooked smile. "Brought you something shiny," she whispered, then passed out. The squad moved quickly, calling for a med team and securing the area. Word spread through the base in minutes. A survivor. An alien helmet. Command scrambled, intelligence officers rushing to intercept. The helmet was placed in a sealed case and taken straight to the tech lab, surrounded by armed guards. As medics worked on Marin, stabilizing her and beginning detox procedures, officers gathered in the lab to examine the device. What they found was more than they had hoped. Data streams, tactical commands, real-time communication models, everything they needed to understand how the hive operated in the field. Back in the medbay, Marin stirred, her voice rough. "Did it help?" she asked. One of the officers looked over at her, eyes wide with awe. "It might end the war," he said. Marin smiled faintly, then closed her eyes. For the first time in years, hope spread through the human forces like fire. The medical tent was quiet, except for the steady beeping of machines and the low hum of voices outside. Marin Hollis lay still on the recovery bed, her skin pale, her body bandaged, and her breath slow but steady. The toxic mist of Theris 9 had done its damage, but the doctors had managed to stop the worst of it. She was alive, though barely. And, in the center of the command tent, just beyond those canvas walls, something far more valuable than her bruised body now sat. The alien command helmet she had risked everything to steal. Engineers surrounded it, their faces lit by glowing blue data projections spilling from the device. Every second it gave more. Maps, orders, real-time positioning, and most importantly, A full model of how the Carvaxi hive coordinated their ground forces. It was like holding a piece of their brain, and it was changing everything. Commander Thalen stood at the head of the tent, arms folded, staring at the display with a mix of caution and awe. He had led human forces on this front for more than a year, and had never seen the Carvaxi break rank. Never seen them stumble. Now, for the first time, their lines were falling apart. Reports came in from multiple zones. Disorganized formations, squads losing contact, groups walking in circles or colliding mid-mission. Whatever link the helmet had provided, it had been central. And now it was gone. Back in the medbay, Marin opened her eyes slowly. Her vision was still blurry, but the clean air told her she wasn't on the battlefield anymore. She turned her head and saw a familiar face. Corwin Jex hunched over a tablet near her bed. He looked up surprised. "You're awake," he said, sitting up straighter. "They didn't think you'd be up for another day or two." Marin gave a small smile. "Did they figure it out?" she asked, voice hoarse. "They figured out a lot," he said. "That helmet's a gold mine. You broke their central command. Relay. That captain you hit. His gear was the anchor for that whole battle group." "Thought so," she murmured. "They started falling apart as soon as I grabbed it." "You didn't just grab it," Corwin said, leaning in. "You brought it back through a fire zone without an ID signal, with half your body broken. You walked into death and came out carrying their brain. They're calling it the moment." The tide turned. Outside the tent, soldiers whispered the story again and again. No one had seen it, but everyone imagined it. A lone engineer crawling through enemy lines, vanishing into mist and returning with the helmet of a hive commander. A miracle wrapped in burns and blood. Marin's name was being passed from post to post, growing with every telling. In the tech lab, the data kept flowing. One specialist, a quiet woman named Tali Varen, cracked a communication subroutine hidden inside the helmet's core. It wasn't just a receiver. It was a two-way system. Human systems couldn't mimic it perfectly, but with enough patching and hacking, they could now send false orders into the Carvaxi lines, not forever, but long enough. By the next morning, Command had a plan. A fake signal would direct a large chunk of Carvaxi forces to retreat from the eastern ridge, clearing the way for a human push. Marin heard about it from her bed, as doctors fussed over her vitals. She didn't care about the pain. She just wanted to know if it worked. It did. The Carvaxi unit on the ridge fell back without resistance. They moved in perfect formation, right into an ambush. Not a single shot was fired before the human forces took the hill. The war had been locked in a stalemate for years. Now, for the first time, the humans were moving forward. Later that day, Commander Thalen visited the medical tent. He stood beside Marin's bed and studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Most soldiers bring back a dog tag or a scar," he said. "You brought back an enemy's command system." "I aim to impress," she said, her voice dry. "You did more than that. You changed the field. You gave us a tool we didn't even dream of having." She looked away, eyes distant. "I didn't do it for medals." "I know," he replied. "You did it because you saw a way through the chaos. That's exactly why. It worked." Outside the base, the Carvaxi were still regrouping, still trying to rebuild their coordination. But without their central nodes, without the guidance from their officer class, they were slower, more unsure. Some units even fought each other in confusion. The Hive had never faced anything like this. They were powerful, but they had never been disrupted like this before, and they didn't yet know how to adapt. In the coming weeks, humans pushed further into enemy territory. They used the stolen knowledge to dodge patrols, disrupt supply lines, and even send false distress calls that split Carvaxi formations in half. The tide of the war shifted, and it all traced back to a battered engineer with nothing left to lose. One evening, as the sun set behind the rocks of Theris 9, Marin sat up in her cot and looked out the tent flap. The air was clearer now, quieter. She picked up a small piece of metal from her bedside, a sliver of the alien helmet that had cracked when she removed it. She turned it over in her hand, watching it catch the light. "They won't see it coming next time," she whispered, and she smiled. not because the war was over, but because now humanity finally had a chance.